Regarding of the 1980 British Grand Prix, after the test that went well, it's well known that your car was suddenly fitted with different compound tires and less performant parts to practice. I read that they needed to change the chassis, and so the car was not the same respect to the test. Do you think that you have been very unlucky, and maybe a good F1 result during that race could have opened you up the doors to having an official contract with an F1 team? What happened on that day of qualifying, because you didn't qualify together with drivers such as Mass and Rosberg?
Yes, I think one of the things we need to take into consideration in the time frame that I raced. First of all, now, this year, we have 22 cars on the grid, okay? When I raced, there were probably 32 to 36 cars, but only 28 could start. So basically, you had a lot more drivers, and if you made any little mistake or the car was just off the pace, you didn't qualify. But you had no option to be put on the grid like nowadays. Even if you don't qualify or don't have a qualifying time, you can start at the back of the field. We did not have those options in our day. So that was very difficult for me. The other car was much faster, much more stable, and I was really able to get used to it. When I drove the car in the British Grand Prix, it was an older model which had been damaged by in the Aurora series, and the car was just not good. I can't say to you that, but also, yes, the qualifying tires for the last 15 minutes, the wheels didn't fit that car. It was for another car. So I couldn't run the qualifying tires. So there's no way I could maybe make up 1 second to get into the race. The situation there is, I was very disappointed. We could never say if I qualified, if I'd done a good job in the race, okay, maybe I wouldn't say I would have got a Grand Prix season out of it, because I'm realistic. Even in the 1980s, you had to have sponsorship, and I only had sponsorship for the British Grand Prix. So there's nothing to say that I would have been able to race anymore, because I wouldn't have had the sponsorship. But if I'd done well in the race, maybe somebody would have helped me.
In that time, who was the F1 driver that was more close to you, despite the fact that you, of course, did only that Grand Prix in F1? That driver that was happy to share information to you, or just wanted to show you support? Because on the grid, I remember there were drivers like Rosberg, Gilles Villeneuve, Carlos Reutemann, and also Jody Scheckter that I interviewed.
Yes, to me, I was driving for myself in the race and for my sponsors. I didn't really think about the famous people I was racing against. I knew I had to do my own job. But at the same time, later on, no drivers wanted to help me, okay? It was nobody, basically Jacques Lafitte was very bad to me. He almost drove me off the track on my first qualifying session. And then after that, he said no woman should be in Formula One, which meant he deliberately did it. But of course, in those days, there were no rules against hitting each other or crashing into each other. Like now, you get penalties. There's no penalties in those days. You just had to race. And but later years, Jochen Maas was very friendly to me when I went to race at Goodwood. I didn't speak to too many until the South African Grand Prix was also difficult for me later on.
So it wasn't really a pleasant experience in the 1980 British Grand Prix with the other drivers?
No, I wouldn't say not a good experience. It's just nobody talked to me. And I could try and ask some advice, but everybody was too busy doing other things, looking after themselves. And I was also a very shy driver. I always relied on myself and my team, and that was the important part.
In 1981, you also raced as you just were saying, the infamous South African Grand Prix that was not recognized as an official race, and in that time you raced with Tyrrell and your teammate was Eddie Cheever, and you qualified for that race with a good lap time. And I would like to know, how much do you remember that race, because you raced in your hometown, of course.
Yes, it was very, very nice for me. It was exciting for me to come back to South Africa after being away for quite a few years, and to drive in what then was called the South African Grand Prix for Formula One cars. Unfortunately, there was political issues, and the race was not an official Formula One Grand Prix. But I didn't know that. I was just interested in what I could do. The Tyrrell was not quite as competitive. I wouldn't say not quite, quite a lot less competitive than a F007 Williams. And so it was quite difficult for me. Also, I originally was supposed to drive a Brabham for Bernie Eccleston, but I guess Zunino had a lot more money than my sponsor. So Bernie put Zunino in the car, and then I was relegated to Tyrrell, which I had a lot of respect for Ken Tyrrell. He was an excellent person when you were a first-time driver, very fair, but very strong. If you made a mistake, he'd let you know all about it, and that's fine. With Eddie, it was very difficult. He didn't really want to talk about anything, but in the team meeting, we did a little bit of different discussions on the car. So it was very exciting for me, but I made some mistakes, so I was disappointed in myself.
And you were talking about Ken Tyrrell, and so I wanted to know better, how was your relationship?
Relationship with Ken Tyrrell was very good. Mechanics were fantastic. The difficulty was that I had not ever driven the car, and we went straight into practice. I'd also not driven a race car, apart from a Macau, from Atlantic, where I finished 6th in November, but I had not driven a race car for 6 months. So I had to get into the Tyrrell and have the seat made and just go flat out from from practice. So it was difficult, but the relationship was excellent. He tried, after the South African Grand Prix, he asked me to get my visas for Brazil and Argentina. And also he said, look, we'll try and get you in the car for Long Beach. But a former teammate of mine, Kevin Cogan, was able to bring the Michelob sponsorship to Long Beach. So I was just a spectator at Long Beach.
You had a fantastic career in endurance racing as well, and driving the icons cars like the Porsche 956 and 962 at Le Mans. Did you prefer the nature of F1 cars or the prototype cars?
I loved Formula One cars. Okay, they were so special, especially the flat-bottomed Formula One cars. They were very, very, very nice to drive. I mean, hard, but you could feel everything. So I liked them very much. The 956 was exceptional. It was amazing. I first drove the Decadene Cosworth car, which we finished third at Brands Hatch, first at the Monza 1000, first at the Silverstone 6 hour. A very small budget, but I was very excited because I managed to win those races, having sat in the car for 3 hours with just one quick pit stop for fuel, because Alain was fabulous. He drove the car first and usually gave it to me in third or fourth place. So I was able to pick up the speed and do a good job. Then we went to, and then unfortunately I crashed at Le Mans, so I didn't start the race. And that was 1980. In 1983, I was very lucky to drive this Porsche 956. What a fantastic race car. I remember going into the Indianapolis corner, which is a very fast, slightly banked left-hander, too fast. And I went, oh no, I've made a big mistake. And I just turned the steering wheel, no brakes, no accelerator, and the car drove around the corner. I was quite embarrassed because I selected gear and I said, oh, this car can go through that corner that fast. So it was a fantastic car to drive, and we finished 7th overall after a few little problems.
You also competed in IndyCar in the USA, and what difference did you have to the American mentality towards a female racing driver compared to the European F1 environment on that years? And I remember to the audience that you also had a bad accident in the Indy that broke your leg.
Okay, a little bit different, but in the Indy cars, it was much more difficult. American men of the 1980s, it was all about men, and Indy cars were for men, not for women. So I came across very similar problems, and especially later on in 1982-3, the mechanics hated me. They didn't want a woman in their car. And in Europe, my mechanics were usually Australians, New Zealanders, and British. And they didn't care who their driver was. They made their car the best they could. And they actually liked me very much. I spent many hours in the garage with them. In America, it was different in that the mechanics didn't want a woman in the car. At Indianapolis, they didn't want a woman driving in Indianapolis. So it was a very difficult situation. But again, I just said to myself, I'm here, I'm doing the best job I can. And so I did the best job I can. But I also drove for one of the smallest teams in Indy cars. And we had lots of engine trouble and the wrong parts on the cars because we didn't have the big dollars to pay for the good stuff.
You won prestigious race.
And then braking. And I didn't have my big crash in Indy cars. My big crash was actually in the IMSA series in a March chassis with a Porsche engine.
Yeah, I did a mistake.